Hi, everyone. I really am excited to talk to you today about the Higher Ground Leadership Program because this program is what sparked my interest and really the bridge between history and leadership. They were kind enough to make me a facilitator about a year and a half ago, and it really sparked for me the opportunity to see how history can really make an impact in people who are either starting or extending their leadership journey or growing their leadership journey. So I've twisted Nancy's arm to talk because Nancy, most people don't think I want my individual or my program or my corporation or my organization to grow in leadership. And we normally go to like a New York Times bestseller or some other speaker. We don't think Gettysburg. But before I start, last year there were over 33 of these programs on the battlefield, and that touched over 2,500 leaders. And I think this year you're even projecting to do more. So, where do you wanted to start the story of how you describe to people when they're thinking about, their organization or doing a leadership program? Why higher ground?
Well, first of all, thank you, Elaine. Let me welcome you to the Kinsley Leadership Center at the George and Elizabeth Spangler Farm and 11th Corps Field Hospital. That's part of what makes Higher Ground so special is our setting. First of all, we are at Gettysburg National Military Park. We are a kind of an outgrowth of them through the Gettysburg Foundation. And what makes the Higher Ground Leadership Program so special is we translate the history of what happened here, the leadership decisions that were made here into a modern context. People are people. They had maybe a different context 163 years ago, but it was still the same sorts of issues: communication, rogue employees, encouraging people to take initiative, making sure that you don't tamp down that initiative, making decisions in crisis moments. Where is the position of a leader? Who decides that? How do you determine what your leadership style is? And then how do you alter that based on the person you're trying to lead? Because you can't use the same style for everyone. So, what I find is that when we have folks come here who say, "Look, I have no interest in history, I don't know anything about the Civil War," what we find when they leave at the end of a program, whether it's a day long program or a 2 day full experience, is that they walk away from this going, "I had no idea. I
Right.
had no idea that all of this history was still relevant today." Now, we sneak in some history of the battlefield and they learn about, we teach it not just a bunch of numbers and dates. What's really important is the people. And that's really at the essence of good leadership, is taking care of your people, understanding your people. And that's how we structure the program here, is let's understand the people who made these decisions, why they made these decisions, for better or worse, and then how can we apply that to today's, what we think of as chaotic moments, but certainly they were living in a chaotic moment as well. So people are easily able to draw those parallels and apply the lessons to their own lives.
What I found was really interesting in the tours that I've been able to do and echo the same experience you have is the stories are very universal. Like, as somebody who loves history, I was just going to be excited to share history and hopefully do a moment. But I can see the participants, it's almost like the stories are more inviting than if they did a story that was present day, because that's too close to home, right? It's nice to be in somebody else's story for a moment and a story that's universal enough. And you don't think history is, but it really is. Like you hit on communication. Well, if you want to talk about challenges with communication, just any of the stories here on the battlefield are about communication and how you judge your audience and what mode of communication you need to do and how you need to alter it based on where they are in the organization. Or how are they dealing with a moment of where am I? Because I've got a new team. Am I in the front or I'm in the back? And it's heartwarming to watch people just get invested in the stories and get welcome to the stories because you can see them in the first when they start the program just kind of being, I don't know anything about history. You just had me watch like, a 15-minute video, or maybe I committed to watching the 4-hour Gettysburg movie before they came. But it takes about 20 or 30 minutes and then they start to get it that all they need to do is listen to the story and it relates.
Absolutely. So Where we typically start off in the battlefield is over on what we call McPherson Ridge. And this allows us to do a couple of things. It sets up how was it that the battle happened at Gettysburg.
Mm-mm.
The South came in from the North came in from the South. We do use maps to try to orient folks, but it also gives us an opportunity to talk about communication. Example of good communication with General John Buford with the Union Cavalry, and ineffective communication or lack of communication with General Jeb Stuart on the Confederate side,
Yeah.
who did not communicate with Robert E. Lee, and that caused some major problems. Now, we translate that to the modern day. Okay, how much communication do you need? When do you need it? Who do you need it from? How to communicate vertically? How do you communicate horizontally?
Yeah.
They had the same exact issues. And I think one of the reasons they're able to relate to these stories more so than if we were to talk about, say, modern military leadership is the politics are removed from it for the most part.
Yeah.
So these aren't Democrats or Republicans. Now, we do have the issue of them being Confederate and Union, but it's still different. We're able to separate the fact that, you know, the why they got into the war. It doesn't play so much in terms of the leadership program because we want to dissect the leadership decisions. And we could go into a lot more detail about, you know, what motivated these folks. But in a day or day and a half or 2-day program, you want to stick to the lessons. What can we learn from these folks? And then separate that out from what maybe their political beliefs were. Because we had good and bad on both the Union side and the Confederate side.
I think that I've also seen, to echo what you said, is people understand that they're in the history. Like there's things that you can bring in. We're not trying to say those didn't exist, but we're just using the history as a mechanism to have a conversation about that leadership moment. So it just doesn't play right into what we're talking about because anything that you're doing, corporate, a civic leader, a military leader, you're going to be dealing with the politics of the day. So if you just make it universal, then it still plays into how you have a conversation. So you have a lot of programs that are repeats. You have a lot of loyal that keep coming back, and not often are they what I would call under a military lens. And the reason I want to emphasize it is most of the programs who come back aren't military by nature. Because coming into this, the reason I say it this way, I thought that the organizations that would have been more of your repeat participants would be something that calls the Civil War calls to them or the history or the military history, but it's not. What have you heard from the organizations who come back so frequently? What's the impact and why is this such an integral part of their leadership story?
So we just did a survey of program participants who've been here sometime in the last 4 years, and a couple of themes really stand out. Number one is what we already talked about, that the leadership lessons from the Civil War still apply today. It's just a different context.
Yeah.
And it's not the military structure because we don't even get into that in our programs. We don't talk so much about hierarchy. But let's face it, every organization has hierarchy.
Hmm.
There's your executive level, there's your mid-level managers, your frontline managers, and then your frontline workers. And that's true whether it's, a large corporation, a small startup, or a university, or even, ROTC groups that come through here.
Right.
So we don't focus on that military aspect. It always comes down to what was the decision they made, and let's talk about how this happens within your organization. An example might be you have an important situation arising. How do you make sure that the people working on your team have the power to make decisions? And we separate that idea of being a micromanager, a supervisor, or an actual what it means to be a leader. A leader means that ultimately you're still responsible, but how do you make sure that your people feel confident to make decisions? John Buford was in a situation where his boss, General Reynolds, and his boss's boss, General Meade, both had confidence in Buford and said, do what you need to do. Here's the task that we give you. You figure out how to do it. And it worked for him. Whereas conversely, another example that we use is General Robert E. Lee and General Richard Ewell. Ewell was very new to the position, and Lee used a style of leadership that had worked with Ewell's predecessor, General Stonewall Jackson, but it wasn't going to work with Ewell. And Lee didn't recognize that. Lee never altered his leadership style with anyone he worked with. And so that led to miscommunication, missed opportunities on the battlefield. And we can say in hindsight, yay, the Union won. But we use this as an example of, this is you can't walk into a leadership role and say, well, this is my style and everyone has to adapt to me. It's actually the opposite of that. You have to know who you are and know what works for you, but you also have to understand your people and understand which style of communication, which style of leadership, how much guidance are they going to need? How much mentorship are they going to need depending on where they're at in their career?
Oh, and I'm listening to you and knowing that most of these programs, I mean, if they do it right, it's a 2-day program. Sometimes just because of time constraints, there's an abridged version that's a day. And as I'm looking at this, I mean, we've the stuff that and I'm going to rattle off some of the other ones, like recognize your biases, communicating because it's always one of the top, understand your audience, respecting the team, sharing control, respective conflict, missing the bigger picture. Like you just highlighted one or two of those stories, but there are 20, if not more, on this battlefield. Can you talk through some of the other audiences? Who is showing up to this and where are you looking to grow this program? Because I'm equally excited about what's on the horizon.
So when I first came here, Higher Ground Leadership basically was the program. We had one program. Now we would work with clients to adapt that program to their needs. So as you mentioned, we have 20 different modules or stops that we can do, but we obviously don't do all of those. Instead, we work with the client, we do pre-program surveys. What are issues that are of most important to you? And then we often will have meetings with the people who are organizing the experience or even the entire team that's going to be here. And we will draw out from them what are the issues that are of most concern to them, and then we'll design a program based off of that. So our programs are not cookie cutter. They are tailored to the organization, which again, I think is one reason why
Yes.
we have so much repeat business, because our clients know that when they bring a new group of people here, they're not getting the exact same program because it's different people who may have different needs and different concerns. So that's one thing. Now, one of the things I noticed when I came here is there was a lot of opportunity to expand our audience and expand what we talk about. So, for example, our what we now call the Decision Point Leadership Program is that foundational leadership program. That's obviously our most popular program. That's the one where we're almost entirely out on the battlefield, and we get into those leadership lessons like
Right.
we've been talking about. There's a next step up from that called our Advanced Command Program, and that is for those leaders who have been through that first program that now are looking for more. So these are often executives, these are people who may have moved up in the time since they took that initial leadership program, and they're just looking for more. And when we say advanced command, we're talking about the higher leadership within both armies and the decisions they had to make managing large numbers of people, large numbers of supplies, logistics, all of those things. The higher up you go in an organization, the more important logistics are.
Yes.
So that program really deals with that. Now, we also wanted to give an option to high school and college students that was very specific because not everyone is comfortable with the idea of just focusing on the war or the battle itself. So we now have a program called Crossroads of Citizenship. And this starts on the battlefield and ends on the battlefield. But in the middle, we're in town. And it's really about helping young people understand that term citizenship. What does it mean to be a citizen in my community today? Because we look at the recovery effort. At the end of the battle, when the armies pulled out, they left behind 21,000 wounded. All of the farms in the area were devastated. Their crops were destroyed. Horses were gone. All the livestock was gone, homes were damaged, buildings in town were damaged, and there were about 2,400 people living in Gettysburg at the time. So you can quickly do the math and realize this is really overwhelming. There was no FEMA at the time.
No.
There were no government supports. So there were some charitable organizations that came in, but it was really the citizens that pulled together. And some people who had not been leaders in any way, shape, or form beforehand stepped into leadership positions at that point. Some were asked, some just volunteered. And so this program really gets at the heart of what it means to be a citizen, because that word gets thrown around a lot, just like leadership.
Right.
And for a young person trying to find their way in the world, the goal of this program is to really kind of help them see that, oh, I have a way that I can help my community. We also have another program that's kind of a derivative of that, but it's focused more for city, county, and maybe state officials who are looking at the people side of recovery from a disaster. And I've lived through natural disasters. If there's one thing that officials tend to get wrong, it's the people aspect. They've got all the technology, they know all the government grant programs and all that. But in terms of how they handle the citizens, how they work with the citizens, how they communicate with the citizens, when you get that wrong, it can be devastating in terms of trust. Once you've lost that trust, it's very difficult to regain that, and you lose precious days and weeks
And moments.
and moments in rebuilding that trust when you make a mistake there. So this program, again, the From Crisis to Recovery program starts on the battlefield and ends on the battlefield, but in the middle, it's really focused on that. How did people communicate in town? How was the community of Gettysburg able to recover relatively quickly?
Now let's take the conversation of what the Higher Ground program does for the Gettysburg Foundation. The thing that is so compelling and why I'm such a fan of continuing to show up to Gettysburg is there are so many stories to be told here, right? Yes, it may start with a battle, but then there's the recovery and how there's healing and there's reunion and or reconciliation, and then there's how do we honor what's happened here, then the Gettysburg Address, and we're not even talking, we'll put teasers out there, there's World War II. There's German prisoners of war here. Like anybody who's a Band of Brothers fan quickly realizes that Eisenhower and Dick Winters is here. There's so much here to preserve, to have a conversation, an authentic and a good conversation about what it means to show up as American leader, citizen, etc. So can you layer into this? So obviously the program has a purpose, but it serves the Gettysburg Foundation, which then serves Gettysburg. So can you give background on how that's a win-win?
So the Higher Ground Leadership Program is a revenue producer for the Gettysburg Foundation. We are an outgrowth of the foundation. So any profit, and I use that in quotes there, any money that we make from this program gets funneled back to the foundation, and it serves the purpose of continuing to tell the story of what happened here at Gettysburg in 1863 and afterwards. So that can mean battlefield preservation projects, national cemetery preservation projects, keeping the museum and visitor center open, staffed, clean. That visitor center has been open for almost 20 years, and the comment I hear most often is, You're kidding. It looks like it's brand new." Well, that's a credit to the staff that we have, the custodial staff, the facility staff. The revenue from this program goes to support all of that. Another aspect is that we also support our For Soldiers, By Soldiers program. So ROTC groups, National Guard, reserves, and active military come to Gettysburg to learn leadership lessons more in the military context. But a lot of these, especially these guard units and reserve units, don't have a lot of money. So we provide the guide to them for free. And then typically it's a guide who has a military background and knows how to make that connection for them.
Right.
And it provides a really nice experience for our men and women in uniform there. Now, another thing that excites me about this program is that through our leadership program, we tell participants, you become part of the Gettysburg story when you go through this program, because you now know the history. You've been here on the ground. This is hallowed ground. There are several places out on the battlefield where there are still soldiers buried. We were not able to remove all of the bodies. So this is hallowed ground. And by being here, you understand, you develop a better understanding of why this place is so meaningful. And you can help spread the word. You can bring your family back here. You can bring your friends back here. You can encourage other people to come here. And that to me is just so important, is getting that story out about that history is still relevant and always will be relevant. And by studying it, you can make it applicable to your own life. But we can also, as a society, avoid some of the mistakes that they made by learning from that history.
And get committed to the future, right?
Yes.
Because we watch it, and the reason this conversation's happening naturally, like, people would have thought we had prepped for 10 or 15 minutes, but no, it was just like, "Hi, Nancy, let's talk." But because it's real, like, I've lived it when I can take a step out of work and help with a program. You get to live it day by day, but you just watch people come, and you can watch their arc of, "Okay, I'm getting out of work. I don't know anything about history." And then it takes about 20 to 30 minutes. They go, "I'm in."
Hmm.
Like, these are Americans. These are people. I know this person. I'm like this person. All of a sudden, time seems to disappear. And then you hear the story of not the conflict, but what they did afterwards, or how they showed up as citizens, or how they showed up as leaders. That almost is kind of affirming that we as Americans can navigate this, and there is a something on the other side. And then you watch the people, because we have had them come back twice. There have been programs where I've had 3 or 4 people who have proactively decided I have to take these same, because they want that affirmation that leaders can show up, they can make a difference, and there is something on the other side. And I'll just emphasize, and then they get excited about the program, but then when you tell them, "But this is not money for money's sake. This is money that gets reinvested and fertilizes everything that's happening with the Gettysburg Foundation, everything that you're doing to make sure military groups have access to it as well." It just warms your heart, I would just say. Okay, we've covered all the topics that I had on my wish list. Is there anything else you wanna mention?
Well, one of the things that I would add, so my PhD is in rhetoric. So my guy is here. He was Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. And one of the things, Chamberlain came back to Gettysburg quite often in subsequent years. He lived into his 80s and was governor of Maine, was elected governor of Maine 4 different times. And he was a very eloquent speaker. So Chamberlain was a professor of rhetoric, but he's one of my favorite figures because of his humility. He understood when he first went into the military that he was not ready for a command position, and he turned one down and said, "No, I need to learn." He was a voracious reader. Um, and those are all important lessons. But something he says many years later on one of his trips to the battlefield, and I think it was at the dedication of the 20th Maine Monument, which was the regiment he led here at Gettysburg, is he talks about how, we're not going to live much longer, and it's going to be up to other people to come here and understand what happened here. And I look at that and I see a great responsibility for those of us who work for the foundation, our facilitators, our guides. They all see this role as, I have a responsibility to tell this story and keep it alive and keep these lessons alive for the future. So I encourage, you to think about that when you're deciding on a leadership program. Ours has a large, large mission.
That's a great segue. It's like you teed it up for me because I'm glad I got the opportunity, because I wanted to make sure that the story gets out there. And I hope, cross our fingers, that a lot more people are going to be having conversations with you if they listen to this. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.